I run an organization called the Building Decarbonization Coalition. This coalition, you can think of it as an industry coalition. We have utilities, manufacturers of heating equipment, manufacturers of water heating equipment and cooking equipment. We have installers, we have design firms, government agencies like NYSERDA and the California Energy Commission, and then nonprofit groups as well. And what we do is we work together to completely eliminate pollution from buildings through electrification. We work on public policy together. We work on market transformation together. What are the changes in the market we need? And we work on consumer education together. And we believe that you need an intersection of all three of those things in order to bring about the change that we want to see at the rate that we want to see. We have regular efforts to keep the industry engaged and to be able to keep you up to speed on what's happening in the policy world and across the market. And so we have a monthly webinar series, and we also have a monthly newsletter that goes out that we welcome your subscription. It's free to join, free newsletter, and it's a great way for us to be able to keep everybody up on everything that's happening on new product releases, new reports that are out there, studies, and the policies that are happening in states and the federal government across our country. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm supposed to give the State of the Union for building decarbonization. I'll try to be anywhere near as feisty as the president last night. I won't get political, but I'm supposed to come in and talk to you about how building decarbonization is doing across the country. Peter told me I don't need to talk about the doom and the gloom of why building decarbonization is happening. I searched for a scarier picture of natural gas on the web. This is about the scariest one I can find. And so I won't say a lot about natural gas. I'll just put this one up there and say that my organization is dedicated to getting buildings off of fossil fuels. And we think that electrification is the best way to do that. And that's basically replacing generally 4 major appliance types: your space heating, your water heating, your cooking, and your clothes drying. That's about 90 to 95% of all the fossil fuel use in most buildings across the United States. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to talk to you about some of the policy trends that are happening, some of the changes we're seeing in the market, and then some things that are on the horizon and the changes we're going to see in building decarbonization. And Peter really hoped for me to be able to give you this information so that you could see how deeply building decarbonization is being embedded in the industry right now and the future that it has, so that you can have confidence in bringing the tools and the resources that the accelerator is bringing to your students, and knowing that you're actually preparing them for a future that is going to be based around building decarbonization. So that's my intention today, and thank you for having me. So I'll just start. I think it's obligatory in these speeches to say the state of building decarbonization in America is strong. This is a picture of Governor Kathy Hochul last year signing the All-Electric Buildings Act in New York. It was the first state to pass a law saying all future buildings in our state will be built all electric. And we're seeing this happen in a lot of communities and states across the country. In fact, 1 in 4 Americans now lives in a jurisdiction that's adopted a building decarbonization law governing buildings that are going to be built or retrofitted within their communities. 25% of the country has adopted these laws moving forward, and we're starting to see some of the impacts in the market from it. It is pretty heavily concentrated. Over 120 local governments have adopted these policies. And then you see a few states. This is a map that we put out. We track every single one of these laws and provide a link to the law, and we have a schema that describes what the law is, what it covers, the types of building types. But you're seeing a real concentration of this in the Northeast, Colorado. Chicago just became the most recent city to introduce legislation like this, and then along the West Coast, of course. But between those, as I said, about a quarter of the country now lives in one of these communities or one of these states that's adopted these policies. And it's growing. It's growing beyond that. Last year, there was 127 different pieces of legislation for building decarbonization introduced in state legislatures across the country. And it's coming to a lot more diverse states than the ones that I had that have already adopted it. And so you're seeing it spread from the early leaders on climate change, like the Washingtons and the Californias and the New York, to a whole much wider spread of states. And they're seeing the benefits of it. They're seeing the benefits of it, not only from a climate perspective, but also from an air quality perspective. They're seeing the benefits of it, of a way to be able to control the rise in utility rates, to be able to bring greater certainty to grid planning as well. So there's all the benefits of building electrification is trying to be recognized outside of some of the early adopter states on climate policy. And we're starting to see the impact in the market. 2023 was the second year in a row that heat pumps outsold gas furnaces across the United States. Also, gas boilers across the United States. This is a big change. It was the first time ever that heat pumps outsold gas equipment 2 years ago, and then last year it repeated it. Every month of the year across the country, heat pumps outsold gas furnaces. You see the downturn in 2023, and that was really a downturn in the HVAC industry and the water heating industry across the board as a result of high inflation and also high interest rates. And so you saw a lot more repairs rather than replacements of heating and cooling systems and water heating systems. But out of everything in the HVAC industry, heat pumps perform better than on rates of growth or rates of reduction than air conditioners, than gas furnaces, than gas boilers. Heat pumps are clearly becoming the star in the HVAC industry right now. And this was a real interesting piece just released from AIA at the very end of 2023, is that we're seeing significant growth in all electric projects coming out of AIA members. This was a survey that AIA did as part of their Architecture 2030 commitment, and a very clear direction happening around AIA members about a movement towards all electric buildings and a spread of the knowledge of the ease of how to do all electric buildings among this class of professionals. We're starting to see the necessary levels of adoption from states and from manufacturers that are necessary to bring about the market transformation that we need at scale as well. In September of last year, 24 states through the U.S. Climate Alliance came together and committed to the installation of 20 million new heat pumps by the end of the decade. Over the next 6 years, bringing about 20 million new heat pumps installed. California was able to sign a major partnership with all of the major manufacturers of water heating and space conditioning in the United States to come together around Governor Newsom's goal of 6 million heat pumps by 2030, and committing to work together in a public-private partnership to be able to bring about the types of programs and consumer education and contractor engagement that'll be necessary to get to 6 million heat pumps by 2030 in that state. And then we were really honored to take part in an MOU between 9 states. You can see that second bullet from the bottom, 9 states coming together, really led by Northeast states, but then joining in with Colorado and California and others to say, we're all going to align our policies, align our timelines, align the types of standards we adopt so we can bring a standardized message to the market around where building decarbonization is going in America, and be able to set really clear targets so that the market can be able to adjust and be able to plan for when these standards are going to affect. And so collectively, these states say by the middle of next decade, they want 90% of all water heating and space heating equipment to be completely emissions-free, basically electric and heat pump powered. And then I'll talk about this at the end of the presentation, but we have now 10 states that are working on neighborhood scale building decarbonization and starting to pass laws that are taking us away from simply the appliance by appliance or building by buildings approach and moving towards whole neighborhood scale approaches to building decarbonization. And I'll talk a bit more about that at the end of the presentation. So the one bullet I didn't cover on the last slide was this. We in November convened all the major manufacturers of water heating and space conditioning into a 2-day summit in Washington, D.C. across from the White House. We had manufacturers that represented 95% of North American market share of water heating, 80% of North American market share of HVAC, Johnson Control, Trane, Carrier, Daikin, everybody was there. And what came out of it was a statement, the manufacturers' joint vision for a decarbonized future. And what this document represents is the first time ever this industry has come together and said, we unequivocally support the aspirations of building decarbonization. And we are here to be a partner in this movement. We want to help states and the federal government move towards building decarbonization and off of fossil fuels. And we're ready to provide the products to make that happen. And so out of that, there was a number of things, and you're not expected to read this, around market development and all the things they wanted to see in market development, consumer education, better program design, certainty on where programs are going and programs that'll actually work for the market. But I think one of the most fascinating and one of the things that we spent the longest on was regulatory side and the policy opportunities. And you had, for the first time ever, these manufacturers saying, we need a regulatory backstop. Like, we need governments to tell us very clearly what your plans are for building decarbonization so that we can plan to make changes. One of the manufacturers summed it up very well. It says, Panama, we just need to know, do we need to change an entire manufacturing line in one of our plants? Do we need to change an entire plant? Do we need to build a new plant? We need regulatory certainty from government agencies so that we can make this happen. This is not them saying we need regulations to stop. This is saying we actually need you to pass ones so that we know what's going to happen. They said, start a new construction. Just immediately go on new construction. Please don't let people install our fossil fuel equipment that we produce and sell across America. Force people to build homes with our heat pumps instead. And then I think one of the most interesting things was on the toughest, and that's on retrofits, where the manufacturers of America's water heating and space conditioning equipment said, we would like you to work with us to get governments to say, when your air conditioner breaks, require that only heat pumps can be put on from now on. Don't let people install our one-way air conditioners or our furnaces any further. The first time ever, the manufacturers are saying, please pass laws to not allow some of our products to be installed across the United States. And so I think we're seeing a really clear message from the OEM community about where they're feeling this transition is going and how they need help from others so that they can help really drive this forward. And we're starting to see the innovation that you would expect from the private sector in order to be able to reach these goals. We're seeing really great designer type heat pumps come out. This is Octopus Energy over in the UK. Puts out this, is going to be putting out this beautiful multicolored heat pump, far more attractive to have on the side of your building. And the really cool thing about this is it uses propane as a refrigerant. And so it's got a global warming potential of 3 rather than like 700 or 1400 to some of the heat pumps that you see out there most sold the most. You're seeing really new form factors that can fit for a wider variety of different spaces, like Gradient and Media putting out these beautiful, really sleek install in half an hour heat pumps for you put it in the window to replace your window air conditioning. It can heat and cool, including cold climate window heat pumps right now coming out from Media and Gradient. You're seeing ones that actually look good and that my wife would actually want to have in our living room on the heat pump heads. And you're seeing cold climate heat pumps take off. Secretary Granholm from DOE's cold climate heat pump challenge recognize that there's already a ton of heat pumps out there that work down at really low temperatures, but that we needed even more and we need them to be better. And so you're seeing a whole new generation of cold climate heat pumps come out that can be working down to -14, -20 degrees Fahrenheit very effectively. And so we're seeing the innovation that we need in order to be able to make it work for all sorts of different applications across the country, as well as innovation in some of our biggest concerns like refrigerants. One of the big areas that Peter mentioned in his intro is around air quality in cooking, and also the air quality that comes from burning gas in our communities. I live out in California, and here in California, burning gas in buildings produces more smog than all of our cars and power plants combined, because we've done a good job on reducing smog from cars and power plants, and we've done very little over on the building side. And there's starting to be a much greater recognition of this. I mean, how great the recognition? This is an article from GQ magazine last year talking about air quality and how 2023 was the year that we really got serious about air quality. And the subtitle on this is thanks to an ongoing pandemic, gas stoves, and Canada is why we're starting to have a greater understanding about air quality. But at the beginning of 2023, you had the federal government and the Consumer Protection Safety Commission, a commissioner on there starting to talk about maybe looking at the need to regulate gas stoves because of the air quality impacts, and studies coming out that suggest as many as 1 in 8 cases of asthma in this country could be as a result of a child growing up in a home with gas stoves. You'll hear more about it in the webinar that Peter mentioned that has coming up for the accelerator. But because of this growing recognition of gas stoves, you're starting to see a real wave of interest in electric cooking technologies. And I don't just say induction because the electric kitchen experience is so much more than just induction. It's got all sorts of wonderful technologies like combi steam ovens and others, but induction has really been the technology that is at the forefront of when people think about the transition. And so what you've seen since the big fight, we call it Stovegate, the big fight at the beginning of last year over gas stoves, is a dramatic increase of Google searches for gas stoves. For induction cooking and electric cooking alternatives to gas stoves on Google. And there's a debate about, was that whole fight over gas stoves a good idea? Like gas stoves became part of the culture war as a part of that. And does that make it harder to pass laws or to encourage people to look at electrification? And I'll just say that something around like public health and something around asthma, those are sticky concepts and sticky ideas. They're things that don't leave your head really easily. If you have respiratory problems, if you have a child with respiratory problems, if you have somebody that you live with has respiratory problems, millions of Americans through that Stovegate experience have now been educated about the potential dangers of the appliance that is likely the largest polluter of indoor air quality within their home, their gas stove. And so just through that process of education, we now have millions more Americans educated and thinking about that as they're looking at purchasing their next stove. Of course, it did enter the culture war, and we're experiencing that right now. There was backlash as all of a sudden gas stoves became a loved darling of some of the political parties in America. And I think what was lost in this is just the sense of like how few gas stoves there actually are in America. Only 35% of American homes use a gas stove, and it's largely on the coastal areas that have the gas stoves. The vast majority of homes in America don't use gas for cooking. And so unsurprisingly, sometimes we lose facts in political debates, but I'm thinking this is going to be a big area of focus. And I'm so happy the accelerator is really digging into this area and providing materials for you all to teach about the latest research on it. The big opportunity, of course, is going to be on retrofits, and how do we hit those moments when somebody is replacing their gas water heater, replacing their gas furnace or their gas boiler? Like, how do we set up systems and programs and policies so that in that exact moment, we're able to capture them, because these have a long lag time. Once you install a water heater, that's got a good 12 to 15 year life. Once you install a furnace or a boiler, that's got a good 15 to 20 year life. Your stove's got a good 20 to 25 year life. And so it's really critical that we set up programs and policies that are able to hit these moments and to be able to help or require people to make choices about low or no emitting technology. And so what you're starting to see is the recognition that if we're going to be meeting our targets of trying to get towards carbon neutrality by the middle of this century, we can't be installing fossil fuel equipment much past 2030. And so you're starting to see some agencies, like I'll highlight California's here, but it's not just California. New York has adopted similar timelines. Maryland, Illinois, Colorado are all looking at this, basically saying that starting in this decade, in certain jurisdictions, you will no longer be allowed to buy gas water heaters or gas furnaces for residential buildings, for commercial buildings, for industrial buildings. And so in California, the air quality management agencies are the ones that are leading this because of that smog issue I brought up earlier. And so in the Bay Area, home to 8 million residents, they're saying starting in 2027, you'll only be able to buy water heaters that don't produce nitrogen oxides. Starting in 2029, you'll only be able to buy heating equipment, space heating equipment that don't emit nitrogen oxides. And the whole state of California will be under a similar regulation by 2030 when the California Air Resources Board adopts this. These are the kind of policies that those MOUs between the states that I mentioned earlier is going to spread out to other states, and we're going to start to have consistency like this across the board. The 2030s are going to be a wave of these sort of rules on phasing out completely the sale of fossil fuel appliances, with manufacturers working hand in hand with regulators to implement them. One of the big areas of change that we're seeing is going to bring about some of the most significant change is what's happening at the public utilities commissions and the public service commissions and the boards of public utilities across the United States. There are now 10 states plus the District of Columbia where the public service commissions are working on policies colloquially called the future of gas, where they're taking a hard look at how their climate plans relate to their plans for their gas system. And just the very clear recognition that you can't put 80-year pipe in the ground if you've got a 25-year carbon neutrality target. And so they're actually starting to look at plans for how do you wind down the gas system in a constructive way. Massachusetts in December released probably what is the gold standard right now of these future of gas proceedings, but you're seeing this in states across the country right now as they're starting to take a more comprehensive look at how to do this. And the reason why is there's a lot of buildings in America. And if you're looking at basically, say, 4 appliances per building, that's a lot of choices that we're relying upon in order to meet our goals, whether that's economic goals, air quality goals, climate goals. And we have a completely disaggregated approach to building decarbonization and climate change right now. This is just some of the actors and some of the inputs you see here on the screen that goes into each individual appliance choice. And so what we're doing is we're hoping right now, we're hoping that this works, that every single time somebody buys a water heater, that they're going to make the right choice. We're hoping that every time a boiler breaks, that somebody's going to make the choice to put in an all-electric piece of equipment. I mean, this is the ultimate faith-based initiative, to be relying upon the current market model in order to be able to bring about the changes that we need. It's not only bad for climate change, though, it's really bad for our goals around equity. The current market model really doesn't care around issues of equity and justice. And so we're not able to, in the current market model, to really prioritize getting building decarbonization to low income or historically marginalized communities. And this is critical because if you play out what's going to be happening with gas utilities into the future, what you're going to be seeing is that as more and more people exit the gas system, there's going to be less and less ratepayers on that gas system to pay for the fixed costs of the investment that's been made in putting all those pipes in the ground. That's going to mean that you need to raise rates on the people that are still left on that gas system. That's going to encourage more electrification. It's going to make electrification more affordable. And so more and more people are going to exit the gas system. And so throughput will continue to decline, rates will continue to go up, and who will be left on the gas system? It'll be the people that can't afford to get off the gas system because they had to buy the cheapest equipment they could when their equipment broke, and maybe they couldn't afford things like rewiring or panel upgrades. It's going to be people with no agency over their choice of appliances, such as renters, or businesses like restaurants that have really high capital barriers to change, but also face really high energy costs. And so we have a real equity issue with building decarbonization done in a non-managed way based on the current market model. We need a better approach. The current market model is also probably the most expensive way that we can do building decarbonization. An individual appliance by appliance approach means that you're relying on a vast network of public policy and programs and hope that customers are going to invest as well. And then us having to maintain a gas system and gold-plated safety safety regulated gas system at the same time as we're building the alternative. And so you're building these two massive infrastructure systems at the same time. It is literally the most expensive way that we can do building decarbonization. And so for all these reasons, we really need a very different adjacent market model for building decarbonization. Not one to replace the 100-year-old HVAC industry and water heating industry that we have. That's always going to be there. And we need to do everything we can to optimize that current market model. But we need to take a much more managed approach if we're going to reach our goals. We need a climate and equity backstop for building decarbonization. And for us, we think that looks like more of a neighborhood scale approach to building decarbonization. And so our organization is doing a ton of work on this. And this topic has gone from nobody talking about this 2 years ago to now we have over 15 states implementing legislation on this year about allowing public utilities commissions to start to push gas utilities to be doing, instead of replacing pipeline in an area where a pipeline replacement is, using that money to instead electrify whole neighborhoods. In New York, it's anywhere from $6 million to $10 million a mile to replace gas pipeline. And instead, could you use a fraction of that money in order to be able to completely electrify all the buildings on that pipe and take that pipe out of the ground, still provide good quality jobs, but decommissioning that pipeline and installing all of those heat pumps, and to be able to, in a managed way, clip off branches of the gas system so that we can control costs. We can prioritize those neighborhoods that are already polluted and are historically marginalized and low income and have heavy amounts of renters. And we're able to meet our climate goals in a reasonable way and plan against it. And so we think that this is going to be a real growing piece of the building decarbonization movement. It's supported by many gas utilities across America, and we look forward to digging in more with everybody on this. So that was a whirlwind State of the Union on building decarbonization. Hopefully it gave you some sense about where policies are going, where the market's going, the support for this. Yes, you can in good faith educate your students about building decarbonization. It has the future. It is the future of the building space. And I just thank you all for the work that you're doing across America's universities, schools, and colleges, educating the next generation of professionals. This movement won't work unless you are doing what you're doing and bringing about those professionals. And so thank you for making this all possible. And thank you, Peter and Lindsay.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Well,
Panama.
and thank you, Panama. Okay, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to read some questions that we had.
All right.
This question's from Pam. What progress has been made to ensure the cost of retrofit permitting fees aren't a barrier?
Hi, Pam. Thank you for the question. As you can imagine, that is a completely devolved approach, with every single local jurisdiction taking their own approach to permitting. You have some that are trying to encourage electrification by completely waiving permitting costs in hopes that that'll help encourage more installation. You have some that are looking for ways to normalize it, and you have some that are doing absolutely nothing on it. And so that's all the purview of local governments. You can pass state laws around it, but if you try to, say, stop local revenue generation through permit fees, I would imagine that the locals would say, well, you got to fill that with some sort of state funds to be able to make that happen. So I think we have a ways to go, not only on permit fees, but also permitting as a whole. I think one of the dirty secrets of the HVAC industry and the water heating industry is just the high level of a lack of permitting, and therefore a lack of professional eyes on the quality of the installations being done. And so we need to do this in such a way that we're lowering the friction from permitting and regulation, while at the same time encouraging more and more of the industry to actually get their work permitted, so that we have the safety regulations that are in place actually implemented on top of the installation. So I think it's a new growing field. I'm encouraged by things like Solar App and what the solar industry is doing around really automating and doing remote permitting. And I think there's something that can be said, particularly as we're taking things off of explosive gas and putting it on electricity. You'd think there'd be a bit more faith in the ability and faith in local governments to be able to do more of a remote participatory permitting process than if you were installing natural gas. So hopefully that helps some, Pam, and happy to, on this question or any questions, follow up with folks afterwards.
Okay, and then we have one from Tom. Wouldn't it make sense for PUCs to have gas utilities start including and collecting a system decommissioning charge in their volumetric gas rates now?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tom's point is that, you know, this pipe, as I mentioned, has 60 to 80-year life, and many states that have climate laws are trying to get to something like carbon neutrality by the middle of the decade, and that's the policy of the federal government now. And so how in good faith can we be subsidizing through our rates the installation of this infrastructure, knowing we exist in that dichotomy, and we need to find a way to make sure that we're going to be able to pull this out. I mean, I just don't know how we don't avoid a major taxpayer bailout of the natural gas industry, the natural gas utilities towards the end of the 2030s, as we see significant exit from the gas system, a utility death spiral for the gas industry. And so the more that we're doing planning now, and the more buildings we're taking off the gas grid now, the smaller that bailout is, the smaller that economic hit for everybody is going to be at the end of the 2030s. And so pre-planning with charges like what Tom's recommending is a way to start to have gas ratepayers plan for that eventual decommissioning and take some of that hit off of the next generation. But I will say that current generations haven't done a really good job planning for the climate for future generations, sadly. But maybe we're turning that around.
Okay, and just one more you can squeeze in here. Can you comment on, from Jackman? Can you comment on the need to develop grid scale storage capacity to accompany solar PV and wind power so that the electric grid can actually be made more fully green?
Sure, well, happy to. You know, we need dramatically more clean generation and storage and transmission and distribution, and the investments that are going to have to be made on that are really great. I saw a study from Canary, or a article from Canary Media last month that suggests that most of the new electric generation capacity that's going to be added in America this year is going to be clean energy, wind, solar, accompanied with storage, geothermal. So it's going to be, I think, we're moving in the right direction on the generation side, but we need significantly more. And you're right, we need storage. What I will say is that even under the current grid mix, even though you have grids getting cleaner across the United States as we transition off of coal and go on to gas and renewable energy, it still makes more sense to use heat pumps for space heating and water heating in buildings than their gas alternatives. RMI did a major study in 2018 that looked at every single state and the average generation grid mix in those states. And they looked at, does it make more sense from a greenhouse gas perspective to use heat pumps for your water heating and your space heating, or to use natural gas? And what they found is all but 2 states, it made more sense, even in states with a lot of coal in the mix, to use heat pumps for water heating and space heating rather than natural gas from a greenhouse gas perspective. And in states like Washington, California, New York, and others with clean grids, it was an absolute no-brainer, like a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So yes, we need a cleaner grid, but even with the current grid, it makes more sense to do all electric buildings right now from a pollution perspective.